مرحبا بكم مشاهدينا في حوارات السياق. نقلت صحيفة وول ستريت جورنال عن مسؤولين لم تسمهم أن السعودية والإمارات رفضتا طلبات الولايات المتحدة للتحدث إلى بايدن في الأسابيع الأخيرة. وقالت الصحيفة الأمريكية أن المسؤولين السعوديين والإماراتيين أصبحوا أكثر صراحة في الأسابيع الأخيرة في انتقاداتهم للسياسة الأمريكية في الخليج. عموما للمزيد من المتابعة ينضم إلينا البروفيسور غريغوري غوز رئيس قسم الشؤون الدولية في جامعة تكساس. أستاذ غريغوري، مرحبا بك معنا.
My pleasure.
هل هناك أزمة في العلاقة بين واشنطن والرياض وأبو ظبي؟
I think that we're approaching a crisis. I don't think we're there yet. This relationship has had plenty of ups and downs, and worse ones than right now. We can go all the way back to the oil embargo of 1973-74. We can go back to the pre-9/11 crisis with Saudi Arabia, which I think was headed in a very bad direction if 9/11 hadn't intervened. And we can go back to the problems that revolved around the Iran deal with the Obama administration. So I think that things are worse than they have been in the past few months, but I also think that they are solvable with relatively minor changes on both sides.
لكن ومع ذلك أمر غير عادي أن لا يرد الزعيمان السعودي والإماراتي. هل تتفهم واشنطن الرسالة هنا؟
Yeah, no, I think that that's true. And I think that stems from a couple of things, some of which are real and some of which are exaggerated. The real things are the United States didn't, I think, do enough when the Houthis bombed Abu Dhabi and Dubai. And the United States didn't do enough when the Iranians bombed Abqaiq. I mean, this goes across administrations, Trump administration and Biden administration, and it called into question kind of the fundamental promises of security cooperation. Those are real. I think that the exaggerations tend to be in terms of a belief that the United States is, quote unquote, leaving the Gulf, which I don't see any evidence of. I think there's also an exaggeration in the Gulf of the effects of the Afghanistan withdrawal, which obviously weren't great, but I don't think are an indication of American commitment to the security of the Gulf. So I think that there are plenty of things on the agenda between Washington and both Riyadh and Abu Dhabi, but I think that, and they are real, but I also think that they are solvable with goodwill on both sides.
يعني أنت لا ترى أن دول الخليج قد غيرت نهج سياساتها مع الولايات المتحدة؟
I think that the Gulf countries, particularly Riyadh and the UAE, I don't think that we should I don't think we should think about the Gulf countries as a unit. I think the Omanis, the Kuwaitis, the Bahrainis, the Qataris, everybody has a different approach to this. And so we shouldn't think about this as just one single Gulf approach. I don't know why Secretary Blinken isn't coming to the Gulf. I don't know if that's because of scheduling. I don't know if that's because people in the Gulf said that he wasn't welcome, given what's going on. I think on the American side, the thing that's most surprising is the unwillingness of Riyadh and Abu Dhabi to act as kind of the levelers of the world oil market. They have the spare capacity. And in the past, both countries have been willing to use that spare capacity to prevent price spikes. And of course, those price spikes in the longer term affect both Saudi and UAE in that they encourage extra production in other places, including in Texas, where I'm from. So there's questions, I think, on the Saudi and Emirati side about American security, promises and guarantees, and there are questions on the American side about Saudi and Emirati oil policy. I think that these things can be aired out, but I think it has to be done at a relatively high level, and that's really on the Biden administration to engage in a high-level discussion with the decision makers in both Riyadh and Abu Dhabi on this.
طيب، ماذا عن العلاقة مع الصين؟ هناك مؤشرات تقارب كثيرة بين دول الخليج والصين. هل دفعت واشنطن حلفائها نحو الصين؟
Yeah, I don't see that. I don't think it's new. I think that the thing that was dangled out in the Wall Street Journal about the Saudis being willing to price oil in yuan I think that that was just if you will, a warning shot to the United States. It's not particularly practical right now to do oil transactions in yuan because there are just not enough yuan out there in the world. But I do think it was an effort by the Saudis to let the Americans know that there's something serious going on. I think that the engagement with China goes back 20 years, and China is undoubtedly and now and will be in the future the most important economic partner in terms of energy for the Gulf countries, for all the Gulf countries. And I think that what we can't forget is the Chinese, at least so far, have played a very, what I would call an economist's game, not a political scientist's game or a geostrategic game in the Gulf. They want to buy oil from energy. And they're willing to have good relations with Iran, Saudi Arabia, the Emirates, Iraq, everybody to get energy. And I think that that doesn't really help the Gulf states who are looking for security cooperation, which the Chinese, I think, are more reluctant to provide. They're willing to sell missiles, but are they willing to play a security role if the Gulf states see a crisis looming with Iran? There, I think that China might not be able to do what some people in the Gulf states think they would like China to do.
الولايات المتحدة الآن أرسلت صواريخ وصارت تسمي الهجمات الحوثية بالإرهابية. هل هذا تغير في الاستراتيجية الأمريكية أو نوع من امتصاص الغضب؟
I think that's a good thing. I think that means people in Washington are waking up to the fact that people in the Gulf see the situation in a much more dire way than perhaps people in Washington did. I think maybe the reason that I'm less exercised about this and don't think it is as large a crisis as maybe some people in the Gulf do is I'm really old. And so I've seen a lot of these things before, more serious, I think, than right now. And in each case, the two sides were able to get back on a cooperative track. And I don't see anything yet that would prevent that from happening. I agree that there are signs on both sides of misunderstandings and exaggerations, but I also think that the fundamental common interests that have sustained the relationship for 6-7 decades in the case of Saudi Arabia, and certainly since independence with the UAE, are still there.
لتوضيح الأمور أكثر، هل من الممكن ذكر أمثلة عن الأزمات السابقة في العلاقة بين دول الخليج وواشنطن؟
So right before 9/11, King Abdullah sent a letter to President Bush 43, and this revolved around the Second Intifada. And he said, "We're at a point where you have to go your way, and we will go our way." That I think was pretty serious. I think that during the negotiations in the Obama administration for the nuclear deal with Iran, there were plenty of indications that Gulf countries were quite upset with the way the negotiations were going, and they felt they were cut out. Not all the Gulf countries. I mean, part of the negotiations were in Oman, but Saudi Arabia felt it had been cut out, and there was quite a bit of more than disquiet. There's active hostility in Saudi Arabia toward President Obama. I know that for a fact, having been in Saudi a number of times during that period. And so I do, in fact, think that the issue now is serious, but I also think it's solvable, just like those two more recent indications that there were serious issues between Washington and its Gulf partners, and they were solvable.
لماذا كل هذا الإصرار على الصفقة الإيرانية من دون الأخذ بعين الاعتبار تحفظات الدول في المنطقة المنخرطة جغرافيا مع إيران؟
Well, I think that, I'm not going to argue that point. I think that the big question here revolves around the relationship between a nuclear deal and Iran's regional policies. The United States has said that it wants to get a nuclear deal to push the Iranians back from the possibility of nuclear breakout, while still opposing Iranian efforts to extend their influence in the region. I think that Gulf states basically agree that they would like to see Iran push back from the possibility of nuclear breakout. But I think they don't see enough action on the part of the United States to try to roll back Iranian influence in the Arab world, whether it be in Iraq or Syria or Lebanon or Yemen. And that I think is a real difference between the two sides.
المتوفر حتى الآن من تفاصيل بخصوص الصفقة هو عن المزايا التي ستحصل عليها إيران، لكن على ماذا سيحصل العالم في المقابل؟
So I don't think this is a question of money, because the Iranians, under maximum pressure in the Trump administration and under UN sanctions before the original JCPOA, they were willing to spend their money to support their militias around the region. I don't think that maximum pressure under Trump cut Iranian support for the Houthis one bit. In fact, I think that their support for the Houthis went up. So I think that the Biden administration, and one can disagree with their position, but I think their logic is, if you can get a nuclear deal with Iran, it might open up the possibility of dealing with the Iranians on immediately Yemen, which I think is the least important of their interventions in the region, and might be able to get the Iranians, who are the only outside power who has any influence on the Houthis, to get the Houthis to serious negotiations. I mean, the problem with Yemen right now is not the Saudis, it's not the Emiratis, it's not the Yemeni government, it's the Houthis won't talk. And how do you get them to talk? So I think that, my guess is that's the thinking in the Biden administration, but I agree that there are tensions between the Gulf states and the US on the issue of how do you deal with Iranian influence in the region.
هل هناك حلف ضرورة بدأ في التشكل بين دول الخليج وإسرائيل لحماية مصالحهم؟
I think that there's plenty of cooperation between the Israelis and Gulf states going on under the table. I think once it becomes public, it becomes much, much more difficult to sustain, whether in terms of public opinion in the Gulf states, or frankly, in terms of the willingness of Israel to place itself on the front lines against Iran. I think that it would, I think that a Gulf states, Israeli alliance, if you want to call it that doesn't include the US as the important third party, probably wouldn't get much done. So it's not my job to tell the Gulf countries what their interests are, and they'll follow their interests. But I do think that they have a longer term interest in two things. One, in the international norm that countries can't acquire territory by force. And that, of course, is what's happening, I think, with Russia in Ukraine. And secondly, I think they have an interest in a world oil market that doesn't fluctuate up and down wildly, that especially that spikes up and encourages production in all sorts of other places where production is extremely expensive. And then that makes the management of the market that much more difficult as prices start coming down. So I think that Gulf countries and Gulf leaders will be able to calculate their interests on that.
شكرا بروفيسور غريغوري غوز، رئيس قسم الشؤون الدولية في جامعة تكساس، للمشاركة معنا في حوارات السياق. مشاهدينا، شكرا على طيب المتابعة، إلى الملتقى.